Running.
Okay.
Fine. So, Paul, nice to have you here.
Mm-hmm.
Nice that I could be here.
That's fine. Yeah, it's
I
great.
have some questions to you. What would you tell German people who are interested in remote viewing, or those who have learned remote viewing but they are a little bit newbies?
Okay.
Actually, what would you tell them to practice, to hold on,
To help them
whatever?
be better remote viewers.
To be better, yeah.
Okay. So, es freut mich, zu den Deutschen zu sprechen. Das ist doch ganz gut. Ich wollte das auf Deutsch beantworten, aber es geht nicht so gut. So, ich werde auf English. So,
You're welcome.
yeah. So, I'll tell the German remote viewers what I would tell any remote viewer. And it doesn't apply just to people who are just getting into it or even people who have been doing it for a while. It applies to everybody. There are probably two things that are most important to success in remote viewing. There's lots of things that are important, but two things in particular that I urge everyone to keep in mind. The first one is you have to be totally honest with yourself as a remote viewer. What I mean by that is when you get something that's right, acknowledge it. If you get something that's wrong, acknowledge that as well. There are a lot of beginning remote viewers and even some long experienced remote viewers who, if they get a session that isn't very good or that's off, they will find some way to make it a hit, to make it an actual describe the target, even if it really doesn't. Then there's other remote viewers who doubt everything they get. They'll get something that's really quite accurate, but they'll doubt it and think that maybe they didn't do it right after all. Both of those extremes are trouble. The ones who try and make everything fit are not going to learn from their mistakes. You have to recognize and be totally honest when you don't get something. The other case is if you do get something, you have to be totally honest and acknowledge it. Otherwise, you don't learn from when you do things right. You've got to be totally in the middle, objective about your own work. Okay, so that's the first thing I would say. And it's surprising how many remote viewers, both beginning and in it for a while, make that mistake. So the second thing I would suggest actually kind of fits in with that, and that is it has to do with what I call the Zen of remote viewing. You have to learn to let go of the process. Just let it go. Not worry about whether you're getting it right or whether you're getting it wrong. Not worrying about whether you're going to be successful this time in doing a remote viewing session. You have to be willing to just say, we'll see what happens. And it's kind of a state of mild curiosity. Okay, so how this fits in with what I just said is that oftentimes people who say, well, this is, they try and find some way to make their session be correct, even though it's not. They're too worried about appearing to be a success. They're too worried about not failing. You have to be willing to let go of the need to succeed or the fear of failure. That's the Zen part of it. If you get to a point where you can just let it go and just see what happens, surprisingly, you'll end up having more success than those who try really, really, really hard. The guys who try really hard are usually going to fail.
Well, thank you. Second,
was that what you were expecting?
Yeah, in a way.
Yeah. Okay.
The other part of it is how do you live with remote viewing? You know many people who are using remote viewing, but more than those are those who are not introduced in remote viewing. How do you handle this?
Oh, gotcha. So something like this. What do I do when I meet somebody that doesn't know about remote viewing? Yeah. So I have actually a little. I call it a script, a little piece of speech. That some other people might call it an elevator pitch, right? Where when I meet somebody, I just pull this out and I change it as necessary for the circumstances, but I already have something to say. Okay, and so I'll tell you what that is. So if I meet someone who doesn't know about remote viewing, I'll say, yeah, I'm a remote viewer, and they'll say, what's that? And I'll say, well, a remote viewer is somebody who does remote viewing. Let me explain what remote viewing is, right? And then I'll say, during the Cold War, the U.S. government developed this program where they would take military personnel, government civilians, and they trained them in this skill known as remote viewing, which is essentially a form of controlled clairvoyance. They taught these folks how to use the power of their own minds to collect information from enemies or threats abroad. Chinese nuclear tests, new Russian weapon systems, narcotics traffickers, trying to find kidnapped victims in the Middle East, various things like this. Essentially, they had a program for psychic spies. And of course, then I go on to say, and the 7 years I was a captain, I was in that program. And then I say, it didn't work all the time, but there were times when it absolutely did work. And I give them a version of that depending on who they are and how they ask their questions and stuff. And that's where it starts. At that point, then they say, wow, that's really interesting, but what about this or what about that? And then I can go in and explain it. It gets them curious, gets them wanting to talk.
You really do open yourself that way?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And do those people ask you, can you remote view my bedroom?
And I'll say yes, but I'm not going to.
Why?
Well, first off, that's private, right? Even though they may invite me, it's private. But there's also this issue that that's not a scientific experiment. Okay. This is a scientifically based skill, and that's just kind of a one-off, ad hoc, as we call it, kind of a thing. And, well, there's several reasons. One is that that's it. That's not really a scientific experiment. Second of all, it doesn't work all the time. And if I'm going to do it right now on the street, that's really hard to do because I'm not focused. I am not relaxed. There's pressure going on there. I mean, it depends on the person which reason I give them. But, yeah. So, yeah, but I don't encourage anybody to do a demonstration remote viewing session. What I do, and I've often been interviewed by media folks and by even some celebrities, right? And they want me to do a remote viewing session, a demonstration remote viewing on camera. And I say, I'm not going to do that. They say, what? I say, no, you are. So what I do is I set them up in usually an outbound or remote viewing session, and I have them remote view. Because then when they've done it, they know it works. If I do it for them, they still don't know. I could have tricked them in some way. If they do it, they know exactly that they did it, right?
Exactly. Tell you a story afterwards.
Okay.
Okay. So, but not according, or a little bit according to that. How is your life, I will not say changed with remote viewing, but it is far out, you're living with remote viewing so long time. Nowadays, what is your status? How are you nowadays living with remote viewing in this society? Probably with religion, probably with all the other people around.
So how do I fit into my world with this additional weird thing that I do, right? So first off, from the religion perspective, I unfortunately belong to a Christian denomination that actually is fairly understanding of this stuff if it's presented to them properly. I'm a Mormon, which is of course not the real name of the church, but everybody knows it by Mormon, right? I'm a Mormon, and the Mormon theology kind of is sympathetic to this sort of thing done properly. And so I have learned over the years how to present it to my fellow Mormons so that it makes sense to them. And that's part of the problem. So in a kind of a different setting, the viewers that I'm talking to right now, you probably have the same problem, but with your family members or your friends or whatever, right? And so what you need to do is think about how you're going to present it in a way that they won't find threatening. And that's what I've done with my church context. But I also do the same thing with people I meet, friends I have. I present them to them in a way that sounds reasonable. I don't talk about little green men. I don't talk about remote viewing UFOs. I don't talk about the end of the world scenarios. I don't talk about these weird things, right? I make it seem reasonable. And by talking about, for example, when we use it in the military. Now, it's something that you viewers out there don't really have access to, but you could maybe find out some of those stories and use those as examples of times when it's successful, because those are down-to-earth examples, right? Those are ones that aren't going to scandalize somebody, startle someone when you explain it to them. In the rest of my world, the only time you run into trouble with it is if people you care about have problems with it. So I deal with that the way I haven't had issues because I know how to explain it, and I've tried to be responsible and reasonable in other parts of my life. I don't go crazy about this stuff. In my everyday life, of course, it's kind of changed my attitude about a lot of things. I take some things in life more seriously than I used to, and I take some things in life less seriously than I used to because they're not important, right? So I suppose remote viewing has actually enhanced my fit in my life for the most part, although my wife does get tired of me talking about it.
I guess I'm not your listeners here. Okay, thank you. We look at in the same way, personally me.